Finally, the John Lennon riddle has been solved, and it's not good. On October 9, 1940, John Lennon was born John Winston Lennon in Liverpool, England. Lennon's formative years were characterized by both trauma and inventiveness. After being separated from his mother, Julia, John was raised mostly by his aunt, Mimi, and suffered from emotional loss at an early age. The terrible death of Julia in a vehicle accident in 1958, with whom he had started to reconnect throughout his adolescence, would haunt him for the rest of his life and frequently appear in his music. From an early age, Lennon showed a rebellious spirit and a strong mind despite the instability of his home environment. These traits would later shape his musical originality and outspoken personality. Lennon founded a skiffle band in 1957 called the Quarrymen, which later changed its name to the Beatles with the addition of Paul McCartney and George Harrison. The lineup would be completed in 1962 by Ringo Starr. Pop music was elevated to a serious art form by the Beatles, who gained unparalleled worldwide success with Lennon as their major songwriter and co-lead vocalist. This triumph also ushered in the British invasion. Greatest people agree that he and Paul McCartney had the greatest successful songwriting collaboration ever, resulting in enduring hits like Strawberry Fields Forever, A Hard Day's Night, Everything You Need Is Love, Help, and Come Together. With its wit, honesty, surrealism, and political consciousness, Lennon's lyrics challenged the conventions of rock music. Over the ensuing years, the Beatles experienced unparalleled success, evolving from a well-liked British rock group into a worldwide cultural icon. Their fame reached unprecedented heights between 1963 and the late 1960s, a period commonly known as Beatlemania. With singles like I Wanna Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, A Hard Day's Night, and Help, they ruled the charts in both the United States and the United Kingdom. As each album progressed from straightforward love ballads to intricate, genre-defying compositions, their musical development became more apparent. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band's 1967 debut was a creative high point for both the group and rock music in general. They were well known for more than just music. A cultural revolution that combined youth, freedom, politics, fashion, and revolt was viewed as being led by the Beatles. But in 1967, their longtime manager Brian Epstein passed away unexpectedly, dealing a terrible blow that caused the group's cohesiveness to gradually fall apart. The group's corporate concerns and personalities had been held in balance by Epstein, who was frequently referred to as the fifth Beatle. He died of an accidental drug overdose, leaving a leadership void that no band member was able to fill. The tension quickly increased, and especially over financial choices, creative autonomy, and external influence. The band's rifts were exacerbated by John Lennon's increasing relationship with avant-garde artist Yoko Ono, Paul McCartney's insistence that his future father-in-law run the group, and arguments over the band's new commercial strategy under Apple Corps. A close-knit band of 4 musicians started to deteriorate due to the strain of celebrity, divergent goals, and personal aspirations. John Lennon took the crucial choice to leave the Beatles in 1969, although his exit was not announced right away. Both psychologically and creatively, his connection with Yoko Ono had taken center stage in his life, and he started to experiment with a musical identity separate from the band. It was a turbulent last year for Lennon with the Beatles. There was obvious anxiety during the Let It Be sessions. Additionally, it was evident that the group's days together were coming to an end, even if Abbey Roads displayed their brilliance one final time. Paul McCartney would publicly acknowledge the band's breakup in April 1970, although Lennon had already announced his departure in a private meeting in September 1969. Lennon began a very private and frequently politically contentious solo career after leaving. In 1970, he released his first solo album, John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, which was a raw and emotionally charged record. Lennon was at his most vulnerable and unadorned on the record, which eschewed the Beatles' opulent production style. In songs like God, Mother, and Working Class Hero, Lennon explored his rejection of religion and cultural institutions, his traumatic upbringing, and his disenchantment with celebrity. Critics praised the album for its simplicity and honesty, which represented a daring artistic comeback. It revealed a different Lennon to the public, one who was more focused on truth and self-discovery than on winning over admirers or pinning a hit song. In the middle of the 1970s, Lennon decided to withdraw from the public eye and began what he referred to as his house husband phase. When he and Yoko welcomed their son, Sean Lennon, in 1975, John decided to put his music career on hold in order to devote himself to fatherhood, a role he had missed greatly with his first son, Julian. Lennon read, cooked, and lived a more sedate life away from the spotlight in their apartment in New York City. But there were also personal hardships during this time, such as his well-known problems with drunkenness and unpredictable conduct. In the years before his sabbatical, Lennon stayed in Los Angeles and partied with other celebrities, such as Harry Nilsson and Ringo Starr, while he was away from Yoko for 18 months. He later referred to this period as his lost weekend. Numerous events occurred, including the well-known expulsion from the Troubadour nightclub due to disruptive behavior. As Lennon attempted to find equilibrium in his life after the Beatles, these events garnered media attention and highlighted the intense mental anguish he was going through. Following a 5-year break, Lennon returned to music in 1980 with the much-awaited release of Double Fantasy, an album he co-recorded with Yoko Ono. Their newfound serenity, maturity, and love were all celebrated in the record. It featured songs like Woman and Just Like Starting Over, which highlighted Lennon's renewed focus on peace, family, and healing. Although reviews were mixed at first, the record became popular because people were excited to hear Lennon's voice once more. Following his first marriage to Cynthia Powell, John Lennon's personal life underwent a number of significant changes. In the late 1950s, while both were enrolled in Liverpool College of Art, they first crossed paths. Cynthia, a reserved and well-educated young lady, was first attracted to Lennon's allure, rebellious nature, and emerging musical ability. Even though John was frequently erratic and grumpy, they developed a romantic relationship while they were students. As their relationship deepened, Lennon, who was still figuring out Beatlemania, chose to wed Cynthia when she got pregnant in the middle of 1962. On August 23, 1962, the couple got married in a low-key civil ceremony at Liverpool's Mount Pleasant Register office. The tiny event was mostly overshadowed by Lennon's ascent to prominence with the Beatles. The couple soon welcomed their only child, a son named Julian Lennon, on April 8, 1963. Julian would go on to become a successful artist in his own right. But soon, their marriage was strained by the demands of Lennon's rapidly advancing career and the constant pandemonium of celebrity. John spent less time at home as Beatlemania swept the globe, frequently traveling or recording, and Cynthia was left to raise their kid mostly by herself. Their relationship was becoming increasingly strained as a result of John's infidelity, frequent absences, and emotional distance. In addition, his increasing drug usage and the stress of being one of the world's most renowned individuals made life at home challenging. As Lennon grew more estranged from his home life and longed for a closer spiritual and creative bond in the middle of the 1960s, things became worse. John and Cynthia were already having marital problems when he met the avant-garde artist Yoko Ono at a London art show in 1966. His first marriage ended sooner than expected because of his instant and deep intellectual and emotional bond with Yoko. A period of John's life that was strongly associated with his early popularity and the pre-psychedelic Beatles era came to an end in November 1968 when he and Cynthia formally separated after 6 years of marriage. By marrying Yoko Ono, a Japanese multimedia artist, singer, and vocal peace activist, in 1969, Lennon made a daring move. In addition to their romantic relationship, the two had developed a close spiritual and creative cooperation and had become inseparable in the years since their first meeting. On March 20, 1969, they were married in Gibraltar, and their relationship became symbolic and far beyond the bounds of ordinary matrimony. Lennon's life entered a new stage that was focused on extreme self-expression, social activity, and personal rebirth. They notably used their marriage as a platform to protest and advance world peace by organizing a bed-in for peace in Amsterdam during their honeymoon. Vietnam War. Their relationship was frequently contentious, and Yoko was held responsible by many fans and media sources for Lennon's growing distance from the Beatles. Lennon maintained, however, that Yoko was a source of strength and inspiration, pushing him to work on solo endeavors and explore more experimental forms of art. Their union produced their only child, Sean Lennon, who was born on October 9, 1975, which also happened to be John's 35th birthday. It also produced artistic collaborations. In contrast to Julian, John deliberately tried to be a loving and present father to Sean. After a 5-year break from the music business, he became a stay-at-home father in New York City, concentrating on raising his son, baking bread, and creating a more subdued, grounded family life. Yoko remained in charge of their business and creative matters throughout this period, solidifying her position as both a muse and a powerful force in his post-Beatles career. Her influence could be seen in a number of Lennon's solo albums, such as Imagine and Double Fantasy, where her avant-garde and experimental style of art merged with Lennon's more melodic and reflective sensibilities. Their connection, which lasted until Lennon's tragic killing in 1980, was very personal and cooperative despite the public's regular scrutiny. For many years, the events surrounding John Lennon's life and untimely death have plagued fans, historians, and conspiracy theories. While the fundamentals of his murder outside the Dakota Building in New York City on December 8, 1980, by a crazy fan named Mark David Chapman, have long been known, layers of uncertainty, contradictory accounts, and agonizing conjecture have continued to shroud the whole story of his murder, the why and how of it, and the larger background of his last years. However, the riddle may have finally been solved thanks to freshly discovered documents, long-suppressed interviews, and obscure recordings, and the truth is much darker than anyone had anticipated. Not only does the new information relive the terrible night of Lennon's murder, delving deeply into a political and psychological underground, they pose unsettling queries regarding manipulation, surveillance, and if John Lennon, once a symbol of peace, became too hazardous for some influential groups. Long-running suspicions that Lennon was on the FBI watch list were verified by declassified documents decades later. However, the mystery became more hazy when Lennon's close associates started to come forward with information that suggested his phone conversations had been recorded, his public appearances had been tracked, and his political activism, specifically his opposition to the Vietnam War and his support for radical organizations, had turned him into an enemy in some of the most powerful circles. Was it anything much more planned, or was Lennon's assassination just the act of a mentally sick guy looking for fame? As fresh evidence indicates, Chapman might not have been a lone wolf. This troubling question has gaining attention. Even though he famously carried the Catcher in the Rye and used the book as his manifesto, his strangely calm demeanor following the shooting, inconsistencies in his memory of events, and additional examination of his psychiatric history have led to theories about psychological conditioning, some of which suggest connections to intelligence programs like MKUltra. The conclusions gleaned from Lennon's last interviews are even more unsettling, particularly his eerie 1980 remarks that he felt unprotected and watched. He talked candidly about the demands of celebrity, the betrayal of longtime friends, and the overwhelming feeling that he was surrounded by people who wanted to silence him, not only in terms of his art, but in a permanent way. As Lennon put it in one of his final interviews, "You don't know how close to the edge I've been, as well as how many times I've reviewed it." In recent months, a former security consultant who claimed to have been tasked with keeping an eye on cultural leaders and had previously worked with top intelligence organizations published a memoir under a false identity. He explained Project Eclipse in it, which is a cold operation intended to eliminate public influencers who are thought to pose a threat to the state. He never specifically mentioned Lennon, but the dates, descriptions, and goals are strikingly similar to what Lennon was doing in the 1970s and early 1980s. There is much more to the sadness of John Lennon's passing than just the loss of a musical genius. If this unsettling story is even half accurate, it becomes a somber illustration of how organizations could try to stifle the opinions that make them most uncomfortable. It's possible that John Lennon, who once sang, "Give peace a chance," paid the ultimate price for doing precisely that. The growing body of information compels us to reevaluate our presumptions, even though the official record is unlikely to ever explicitly corroborate such thoughts. A complicated web of politics, paranoia, and power now surrounds the mystery surrounding John Lennon's death, which was formerly believed to be a tragic but isolated incident. Furthermore, the truth becomes more evident as that web gets more exposed. It's not simply unnerving to finally come to light after staying hidden for decades. It's not very good.